Well, I hope you've all had a chance to read the email sent out by Paul last evening with the CV information for our guest speaker today. Kennedy Gastorn has one of the most impressive CVs I've ever read. And he comes to us today at a critical time for the United Nations and indeed the world. The war in Ukraine and climate change are both issues with which he is deeply involved. So without further ado, and I'd like to make one statement before I introduce the ambassador. The ambassador's speaking to us today may not be as long as any of our regular speakers, because he expects to get a lot of questions from the group, and he's prepared to answer those questions very candidly and very openly. So it is now my honor to introduce to the Summit Old Guard the ambassador to the United Nations from the United Republic of Tanzania, Kennedy Gastorn. Welcome, Kennedy.
Thank you very much, my friend Victor, but also let me record my appreciation to Mr. Paul Toke, who I have a pleasure to interact with him shortly last week, especially in the preparation for this meeting today. But equally more important for me is really to appreciate the opportunity to meet the Old Guard Summit and also exchange ideas on the very topical issues that really we are all interested. Now, I intend to have more interaction between you and myself on various issues. So I will try to limit my speech to not more than 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes, so that we can have opportunity to discuss many other issues that may be of interest to both of us. Once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to address the Old Guard Summit. And please let this be the beginning, so that perhaps in the future, I would be happy really to have opportunity again to engage you if there is any issue, any topic that you may be of interest to you from African point of view, or from Tanzania, or from the United Nations point of view. Now, allow me to share the screen with you all in terms of as I begin my speech today. And I will really start by, first of all, presenting what are my duties as the ambassador and permanent representative of the United Republic of Tanzania to the United Nations. I think it's important because some colleagues have asked me, but all right, what does it mean to be an ambassador? So I thought that let me try to share with you my screen, and yeah, I think, yep, yes, and then,
that's good.
Good. So now, basically, you'll see that the position of ambassador is a position that is internationally defined. It is a position that was or is basically defined by the Vienna Convention of 1961. According to this Vienna Convention of 1961, it talks about the functions of a diplomatic mission. Now, a diplomatic mission usually is expected to represent the sending state in a receiving state, pure and simple. That means it's the mission that would be the face of the sending state into the receiving state. That's number one. But number two is to protect in the receiving state the interests of the sending state. That means all interests of United Republic of Tanzania, for that matter, within the United Nations becomes our responsibility to protect it within the limits permitted by the international law, of course. But the third function is to negotiate with the receiving state. That means we negotiate on behalf of our countries to the places where we represent them in this context within the United Nations. But equally important is to ascertain by all of means conditions and the development in the receiving state and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state. And connected to that again, and which is again equally more important really, is to promote friendly relations between the two states, sending state and the receiving state. And we do that by promoting economic, cultural, and also scientific relations between the two. And perhaps it is on this note that in the context of promoting deeper relations between the sending state and the host state and the global community within the context of the United Nations, that's why I had really requested that some document be shared with you in terms of investment opportunities in Tanzania, but also specifically oil and gas investment opportunities in Tanzania. Things that are maybe of interest to you or within your network, but also things that we as a United Republic of Tanzania wish to put so that we can attract investors and also create even more deeper friendly relations between our states. But equally important, another function of the mission is really to perform consular services or consular functions. Now, this is about diplomatic mission, and any diplomatic mission will be headed by a head of mission, and the head of mission will be usually ambassador. So I have a privilege of serving now as the ambassador and permanent representative of the United Republic of Tanzania to the United Nations. And why United Nations? Because United Nations as an intergovernmental platform, every country has an ambassador within the United Nations. So basically, there is 193 ambassadors called permanent representative within the United Nations who are supposed to represent that country within the United Nations. So that is really the first thing that I wanted to share in terms of my functions and my participation. That means as Tanzania, we have to participate within the United Nations in a way of promoting peace, prosperity, and all those ideals of the UN Charter, which I think we can come back later to discuss, particularly in the context of so many things that are going on globally at the moment. Now, in terms of the overview of my country, I'm very happy that my sister, Sister Magdallena Chubwa, has had opportunity to talk to you, and she eloquently introduced Tanzania, gave really a detailed overview of my country. So I wish really not to repeat them, but simply associate myself with the description that was presented by Sister Magdalena Chubwa, by again echoing that by simply saying that we are a sovereign state that composed of two independent states, Republic of Tanganyika and Zanzibar, and the two came together to form the United Republic of Tanzania. And we are extremely happy because at the moment we have the first female president, and this is very memorable because at the moment she is the only head of state and government in Africa. We have other president, but the other president in Africa, she's only head of state, not head of government. But in our case, she's both the head of government and the head of state. So we are very proud of that, and we look at it as very, very important as we march towards the sustainable development goals of 2030. Now, we are located in the Eastern Africa. We are famous, known as the land of Kilimanjaro, or Serengeti, or land of Zanzibar. Now, beyond the description of my country, I felt like, let me share with you one global crisis. At the moment, within the United Nations setup, there is a consensus that there are three major existential threats at the moment. Number one is conflicts, including the conflict in Ukraine. Conflict constitutes one of the main existential threats that we face globally. The second crisis that we face is the crisis of climate change. It's also a big issue. And the third one is obviously the COVID-19. So the three are really more burning issues within the United Nations. And I felt like today it would be appropriate for me to talk to you about climate change. Not because climate change is the most important compared to other, not at all, but also the other issues are important. I must emphasize that as we speak today, from 10 a.m., as we continue to speak, as we speak right now, the Security Council is meeting and is discussing humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, as we speak today, right now, basically. And in a few minutes, I'm trying to check my monitor. President of Ukraine will be addressing also Security Council to give us the first-hand, facts from on ground as to what is happening, particularly on the recent allegations of the possibility of war crimes being committed within Ukraine and the related matter. Again, but I felt like climate change is one of the issues that I would want to share with you. But I should also add that our president, Her Excellency President Samia Suluhu Hassan, is among really the climate change champion. She has really devoted time and resources in mobilizing global resources in order to engage into mitigation and adaptation projects which can help to mitigate the impact of the climate change. Now, being one of the priorities of my government, I felt like this would also be appropriate for me to raise it. I believe that I don't need to perhaps go in details in terms of what climate change is and the impact, but suffice to say that it is really one of the essential threats that we face today. You see, I'll give an example. For example, with the sea level rise only, the statistics shows that if the current trend would continue, several island states would disappear. And that's something that we have to take seriously. Countries like Maldives, if the current trend continues for another 50 years, just 50 years only, then most of its land will disappear, will sink. And so we have to think on the crisis, the humanitarian crisis that may happen because of the climate change. But equally important, you will see that climate change is affecting so many other issues, almost every sector. Temperature rises, crises in terms of so many things happening that were really unprecedented and unheard, even unexpected. We are seeing saltwater intrusion, and that means it impacts our ecology and so forth and so on. So simply put, there will be no life on Earth if the current trend of climate change remain, unattended. So it's really a global issue, and we have to do a lot. We in Tanzania, we are trying to do our best to contribute to facing the realities of the climate change. We have set millions of acres reserved for conservation, and we believe this is a huge contribution to the global efforts. But also we are trying to develop strategies within all key sectors like forestry, energy, transport, and waste management, just to make sure that at least we have a system that can contribute to the fight against climate change. And also we believe, for example, we have been able to engage in mitigation through hydro and geothermal and solar energies. We have increased the power generation from 49% to almost 69% in a span of 4 or 5 years, and we continue to do that. We are doing a lot of reforestation. On average in Tanzania, we normally plant more than 276 million trees that we plant every year. So you can imagine the contribution that we are trying really to do our best. But again, we understand that this is a global issue and it cannot be tackled by a single country. It's not practical. So we believe that we need to engage globally so that the international community may come together to trying to find a solution. There could be disagreement in terms of which way forward, but I think there is a consensus that the climate change is here to stay unless if we are able to work together. So we believe that also developed countries have a huge responsibility in terms of really, first of all, technology transfer, but also setting up support to the developing countries so that we can try to have a sustainable economies in the place. I think this is more important, regardless of the fact also that the main polluters are the developed countries. You know, I always look at statistics which shows, for example, if you take United States, you take the European Union, you take China and India, all these countries only, I think they constitute over 60% of greenhouse gases that is emitted on a yearly basis. That means if these four, China, India, Europeans, and the United States are able to engage meaningful in terms of really addressing this issue, perhaps we shall be in a better place. You know, Africa is contributing, I think, less than 5%. So no matter what we do, we are not going to achieve anything until and unless the big polluters also join and are able to work with us in terms of really them also contributing to what is expected. Again, I don't want to go into details in terms of our commitments under the Paris Agreement. Most of those commitments remain unfulfilled, but we keep on encouraging and reminding all of us that we have responsibility to meet those expectations, those commitments, so that we can all have a better world. Otherwise, it will be really difficult. To this end, allow me to just highlight a few elements in terms of the investment opportunities that exist in Tanzania. And I know details of them have already been shared. And I believe that some of you may be interested to see, opportunities that, are available in Tanzania from tourism, which we are almost ranked the 4th among 140 countries in terms of the endowment of tourism-related natural resources, which we have in Tanzania. But also we have other sectors and subsectors, including agriculture, oil and gas, mining, fishing, in terms of the blue economy, livestock, real estate, and others. So these are opportunities that we have, and the details of which, again, as I indicated, is already shared with you. But I think the key question that I wish to add is why Tanzania? There are many countries that also may be interested to attract foreign direct investment or investors. But we believe that in Tanzania, we have really very good incentives in terms of the physical and non-physical incentives to the investors. But also we enjoy political stability, and our policies, economic policies, are predictable. So any serious investors would find Tanzania environment more conducive to invest in, because he will be or she will be assured that the investment will be safe. And again, that predictability will enable them, investors, to plan very well, because investment also needs time. It's not something that can be done within within a relative, few years only. It is something that's long-term. But to this end, I want to also share with you 5 priority areas that we have set ourselves at the moment. The first one being to able to stimulate our competitive and participatory economy, because I believe this is very important. We also seek to strengthen industrial production and service delivery capacity, because again, industrial base, we believe that it's a way forward. If we are able to invest in industrialization, I think that will help us to move to the next level. We wish to stimulate human development, but also human resource development. So these are some of the 5 priority areas that we have set ourselves as a country as priorities. Now, looking at them, they again link back to the previous investment opportunities in terms of sectors and subsectors that I already mentioned. And again, I'm happy that I have been able to share with you some reference materials that may be the basis for future considerations. And again, I look forward to engaging you more in terms on what's available in Tanzania, introducing my country to you, and also welcoming you to Tanzania. I was telling Vic the other time that I would be privileged to see the possibility of me, welcoming the Old Guard Summit as a group to my country, to Tanzania. So that's again the plea, and I would want to put on the table that time permits, we can always organize to have a group visit to my country, and I commit myself to be available to facilitate anything that may be needed to facilitate this. With this note, I think I would now end to this note and hope that we can now engage in a further discussion. I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Okay, first question goes to Alan Hamilton. Alan, unmute yourself, please.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much for attending our meeting. Someone will have to remind me if you're the first ambassador we've had to our meeting, but it's a pleasure to have you. I retired from ExxonMobil. I've had a number of trips to Africa, including living in Libya, working in Egypt, and attending meetings in South Africa. So my question to you about climate change, and actually about many other problems in the world, has to do with treating the symptoms of a problem or the root cause. Yes? If you treat the root cause, you solve the problem. Overpopulation in the world, and especially in Africa with such a young average population, is probably contributing a lot to the issues we're dealing with in the world. Migrations, unrest, and things like that. I'd like your reaction to observations about ways to address that issue.
Indeed, the challenge we are facing is really to treat symptoms and not a root cause. Absolutely, right. I agree with you. But at least there is these things has to be a multi-track approach as we deal with the symptoms, because the symptoms are the ones that affect us almost on a daily basis, and they are easily seen by the people. So we also have to attend to them. But equally, we must not lose sight of addressing the root cause, because root cause is the issue to solve. But what are the root causes? First, a lot of countries, they are still using bad energy as, let's say, for example, charcoal or coal.
Right, right.
Now, if you have an economy that is 100% dependent on the coal, it is not also realistic to assume that overnight you can shut down all the coal plants you have in the country, unless you must seek to develop alternative to that, so that life can also continue. So I think that's a big challenge to most of us whose energy depends on sources like coal. But the challenge is now, how do we develop alternative to that? So you find that on one hand, root causes are known, but on the other hand, there are limitations in terms of finding alternative to these root causes, because these root causes are the backbone of some of our economies. That's one. Now, what I'm happy with is that there is a big awareness of the issues, including the root causes. As we continue debates, discussions, I think we shall find a common position on this issue. In the past, there was some sort of a denial, there was lack of knowledge, but I think now scientific community are up to our expectation, really. They have a lot, and they have contributed to our knowledge, and they are guiding our path as we seek solution to that. Now, overpopulation in Africa, absolutely, it's an issue. It is an issue. But I think the big issue is not overpopulation per se, but to have a more prosperous and effective population that are able to contribute to the welfare of the societies, rather than a population that really is not empowered. So empowerment of the population we have on the ground remains to be a big issue. However small the population may be, unless if we are able to invest in this population, we may not solve the migration. Indeed, migration can be a big problem because of numbers, but still, I think we need to invest more in terms of this population. We also agree, on the other hand, that having population is something plus, is something important. It's not something that people should avoid per se. I think the issue is the quality of the population that exists in our jurisdiction. That I think important. How can we turn these numbers into an asset? How can we turn these numbers into something productive for ourselves? So I think that's the kind of a challenge that is that exists in my view. I want to look at it as an issue, but it's not a problem per se, unless if the absence of clear policies to meet the need of that population, I think that is more problematic than the numbers, if I may say it.
Thank you, Ambassador.
So the next is Stu Kurtz. I'll send you an unmute request. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You are an extraordinary representative for your country. I think your presentation, for me at least, opened my eyes to the beautiful possibilities of your country, and for tourism and for investment. The question I have is actually slightly off of what you had presented, and that is sanctions on Russia right now include foodstuffs, and the foodstuffs from Russia is extraordinarily important for the continent of Africa. There's an expectation that if those foodstuffs were denied to Africa, that there would be potentially an awful problem of starvation. Much of Africa is in a situation where there's not an excess of food. There are not granaries that could sustain Africa for months. If the current war in the Ukraine goes on for several months, that's the key growing season for those foodstuffs from Russia. The sanctions that the West is putting on Russia punishes the Russian people. Indirectly, it punishes the Russian government. I think it appears to me that these sanctions are going to have terrible unanticipated consequences. And that is, it turns the Russian people away from the world's, let's say, moral position. They become defensive. And so therefore, they're less likely to continue challenging leadership in Russia. And secondly, probably more important for Africa, it punishes Africa. I do not see that these types of sanctions, especially if the West wants to increase sanctions, is going to have any positive consequence as a result of the sanctions. Would you care to, I would hope you would comment on that.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, the sanctions regime is among very controversial issues from the international law point of view, but also from the United Nations point of view. We understand that countries, they have a discretion to determine certain sanctions against another country or against an entity. And on one way or another, these are some of the prerogatives of independent countries to determine what they want to do. But on the other hand, there has been a study, even before the Ukraine issue, that demonstrated, and that study was within the United Nations, under the humanitarian aspect, that many sanctions regime, much as they are imposed, they are not really meeting the targets. To the contrary, they affect innocent people. And that study is there. And according to that study, the challenge that exists at the moment is a lack of consensus globally in terms of the sanctions regime. And that's why some sanctions that are imposed by individual countries, we call it from the diplomatic language, the so-called unilateral, cohesive economic sanctions. We look at them as unilateral, we look at them as cohesive, we look at them as economic sanctions. Now, to what extent are these sanctions really yielding results? That's again an open question. However, one thing for sure is that sanctions have been there from almost time immemorial, even in Africa. Even we in Africa, at certain point, we wanted sanction against a particular regime. For example, the apartheid regime, we wanted because we believe that sanctions can help. Targeted sanctions can help. But how targeted is targeted is really policymakers that are supposed to make sure that whatever sanction they impose, they must be targeted, very well calculated. Otherwise, they will create more problem than solving it. Now, for example, the issue of food in Africa, indeed, but one, in my view, Africa will not starve because of this conflict. It will be able to develop and get alternative to this, in my view. Much as, of course, impact will be there, the prices will go up, and so on and so on. But I don't believe that the importations of food to Africa will reach a stage where Africa would perhaps really starve. I don't want to believe that. But also, I think for sanctions, the more important, sometimes I think everybody is affected by this conflict, out of question. I wish if this sanction could be imposed through the United Nations, because sanctions that are imposed through the United Nations, first, they enjoy universal acceptability, and we hope that also they can enjoy some sort of a global support in terms of their implementation. Because what now I see is that some countries or a group of countries would impose sanctions, which is fine. But to what extent are they, it's kind of creating some sort of multiple bubbles, and it may not really affect because there will be alternative to everything. So I think the United Nations is a global entity, should be given an opportunity to really deal with this issue and be able to, come out, because with the United Nations, at least you have a global consensus to that. Unfortunately, at the moment, it has really not been the case. And so that's really a challenge. But absolutely, the issue of sanctions is something that people may support it. But let's take an example. Today, 40% of energy that supplies Europe comes from Russia. That's a fact. To what extent is European Union able to impose sanctions against Russia that will target energy sector without indirectly affecting themselves? I don't know. I'm not so sure they're going to do it, but that's a fact. And I recall the other time Russia had issued a statement to the effect that they will perhaps not be willing to sell if the proceeds of that is also faces some sort of some sanctions. Yeah, but really, my take is that it is something that has to be carefully designed, carefully implemented, and any sanction regime to succeed, it needs majority to support it. It needs some sort of global to agree on it in order to achieve legitimacy.
Before we go to Tony, let me ask a follow-up because there are a couple of questions in the chat. And people are asking, well, wouldn't Russia just veto sanctions in the UN because they're on the Security Council? I think the answer is that the Security Council is not the body that would impose the sanctions, but you tell us. Absolutely.
It's within the United Nations, the Security Council is the organ that is charged with matters of international peace and security. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, the fact that Russia is also a member to the Security Council, it means that the chances of vetoing those initiatives are there. But again, that's what diplomacy is all about. It is what it is. We don't have to lose hope. We have to engage constructively. And that's why the discussions, you know, people continue discussing it. I think, do we have alternative to that? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. And I think that's really some issue that globally need to be discussed and thoroughly and carefully, in my view, calculated, because this is a system we have. If system is not working, perhaps it's a time to rethink about the system itself. Why is it not, is it unable to really give us the best results?
Thank you. So Tony Visalki.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your very enlightening talk. But I would like to move my observations and questions outside your talk. China has built a rather nice railroad from Mombasa to Nairobi, and it stopped in Nairobi. Why didn't it carry on to Entebbe, Kampala, et cetera, et cetera? So, and then the second observation I want to make is that the large finds of oil and gas in Western Uganda, they're going to build a pipeline from Uganda, and then, interestingly enough, it's going to go south through Tanzania into Dar es Salaam. There's also talk of building another railroad from Dar es Salaam, again across Tanzania, up north through Kigoma, and with a branch going to Kigali and possibly Bujumbura, and then going up to Entebbe, or rather Kampala. I'm sorry about that. And given the fact that when we look at the three countries of Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, most of the foreign investment is going, a lot of the foreign investment is going into Kenya. For example, the United Nations offices are all in Nairobi. But given the issue of the railroad and the pipeline, do you think that Uganda and Tanzania have done this or proposed this to strike at Kenya? That they're bandwagoning together, Uganda and Tanzania, against Kenya?
First of all, thank you very much for your observation. I don't believe that to be the case. I don't believe that to be the case because the decision, for example, to construct pipe from Uganda to Tanzania to Tanga was a decision that primarily was to get access to the Indian Ocean. That was the one of the considerations. Now, whether you move a pipe from Uganda to Mombasa or to any part of Kenya, or you route it through Tanzania, I think those are the issues for economists. And I believe it was a feasibility studies that demonstrated that it was more beneficial to have it routed through Tanzania. I don't look at it as the decision that was based to either a decision which had anything to do with Kenya. I just want to also share, to point one thing that Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda basically used to be almost as one country, with the Nairobi being almost the capital for the region, you know, during those days, you know. We had the East African High Commissioner who was based in Nairobi, and the other commissioners would basically report to the Nairobi Commission until when we became independent in the 1960s, you know, and then that's how we started to become more independent. But also remember, with the East African community, The first one, which was really based on the fact that there is a connectivity or connectedness between the three countries that really cannot be, in principle, you cannot do without it. So Tanzania cannot do without Kenya, Kenya cannot do without Tanzania, and Uganda for that matter. So any decision as to which investment goes where, primarily is also investment for the region. I think it's more that, because, for example, if you had had opportunity to see the East African Railway Network, which we have today, or East African road networks, you will see that connectivity of all this nature are included within those programs. So it's a question of simply implementing those initiatives. Now, the issue of Mombasa-Nairobi Chinese Railway is a tricky one. It's a tricky because that is first a sovereign decision of Kenya, you know, and we are not privy to the contract and how that contract was set up, what are the benefits and so on and so on. But we believe that it was an appropriate sovereign decision of Kenya to engage China to construct that railway, you know, and really we have to end there. We may not really go beyond that as well. But also, there are many, China is one of the key investors in Africa, and it has engaged African countries on numerous projects that are going on, you know, so this is not an isolated incident. And in my view, it is something that has to be seen as a positive to the region, to Kenya. But again, let's be assured that there is no competition among, for example, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. There is more cooperation, and particularly within the East African community.
Right now, let's ask Bill Tittle. Oh, and Bill.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for a very, well, thank you for being here, for starters. It's great to see you. I'd like to focus on your comments about climate change. Personally, I take complete responsibility that the four large countries or regions you talked about are the problem here. But as you probably know, it's very difficult at times for people to, as a country, to make a decision to do the right thing, to do the fair thing. And I don't know if you happened to see the, on television last night, there's a show about Benjamin Franklin, one of the founders of America. And what I took away from that show was that the key thing that happened when we were a developing country, just like the countries in Africa, that the only way we were able to have our wills imposed or heard was to take those 13 colonies and put them together. Now, I realize that this is a real big problem for Africa because of the tribal history. And I mean, we have enough trouble with tribes in the United States today. But I got to tell you, I'm not optimistic that we will do the right thing in the United States. It's almost 50-50, as you probably observed and read the newspapers, about whether we will take responsibility and do this or not. So what are your thoughts about this?
I think the United States is already doing something that important in contributing to the crisis, the climate crisis. Whether that is enough or not, that could be a different question. But I believe that I see more of commitment of the government and also initiative of government and the private sector in terms of, for example, developing renewable energies alternative so that really to mitigate that. And I think that's really a huge contribution. For me, I would want to see that countries that, had to do what they did to be where they are now, because that is a thing of the past. But I think more important is what are they doing now to address it? For example, as I said, it is impossible to assume that, for example, India will just overnight close all factories that are based on coal. It's not practical. It's not practical. However, it is very satisfying to see that the government is taking initiative that in 10 years, in 20 years, they are going to move out of that and address that problem. So for me, when I look on the initiative on the table, that's really what's satisfying me. And I think the United States should do more to do that, should do more as one of the big power that has influence. It can also mobilize other like-minded countries to do more in terms of the climate change. I'm happy that the current government has appointed, I think, John Kerry as the environmental envoy. I was with him in Doha last week. He was in Doha, which I also attended the Doha Forum. I had opportunity also to listen to him in Glasgow last year when we had the COP26. And I think those are very promising trends in my view. Yeah. But again, in terms of the unification of Africa, indeed, I think Africa is among very, very coordinated regions at the moment. We have some issues, but at least our African Union is working hard to bring us together so that we can plan together. And I just want to remind you of the recently African free continental trade area. That is going to be a game changer if we can implement it, because that will allow free movement of goods, services, capital, to flow across the Africa. I just want to take note that intra-continental trade in Africa constitute only 17%, less than 20% among ourselves. Europe is about 69, I would say 70%, 70% of trade among themselves. Asia is about 60. So look, Asia 60, look Europe 70, and look Africa 17. So we have to do more really to connect among ourselves and to trade among ourselves. So politically we seem to be more connected despite some challenges that we face at the moment. But I think we have a promising trend and we can see a lot of signs.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to slip in a question myself now that's on a very different topic, but since you're now an ambassador in the UN and you have, African perspective on things, I'd like you to comment on the Rwanda Genocide. And of course, we were all, it just broke our hearts. It's terrible, one of the worst disasters ever. And yet, the outside world seemed to be powerless to do anything about it as it was happening. And of course, that was long before you were in the UN. You were aware of it, and your heart was broken, like all of us. But what do you think the world could have or should have done, or what could the UN have done?
I think that's the genocide in Rwanda, which took place way back in 1994, where an estimate of almost 1 million people killed in span of 100 days. We're not talking about genocide of 2 years. We are just talking of genocide, killing of innocent people within the span of 100 days, 3 months basically, of 1 million. Troubling signs were there. There is no denial about that. The United Nations and the international community was extremely aware of those troubling signs, but they failed to take action and action in time. And let alone the United Nations, through the Secretary General, apologized and made it very clear that they had let down people in Rwanda. So it is on record of the failure of the international community to take note of the troubling signs. And I think that's again a reminder to so many conflicts that we have today, that unless we take action and those actions are taken timely, we may not be able to avoid the other Rwanda. But the good thing is that The current government in Rwanda, they have done a lot, and the people themselves really to build back better, basically, you know, get out of that and try to move ahead.
Yes,
And,
they have.
you know, they have. And I think that's something that really goes to the credit of the Rwandese men and women who work tirelessly, regardless of a lot of challenges. But again, Rwanda is just one among few examples that always remind the international community that it must act timely. I just want to tell you, the very famous Secretary General, Dag Hammarskjöld, many years ago, he mentioned that the United Nations was created not to take people to heaven, but to prevent people from going to hell. That's what he said. Now, there are people who are saying that the United Nations, on numerous occasions, has really failed people, not only not taking people to heaven, but even preventing them from going to hell. So again, that's a reminder about what the international community can do. And that's why through the genocide in Rwanda, we now have principles like responsibility to protect, which again is a responsibility to really give us international community that really people must act and act timely.
That's good. So I guess it's a work in progress, but we are making progress, I hope. So Tom Pate's Zoom froze and crashed, but he's back. So Tom, you get to ask your question.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining us today. It's been a very interesting talk. I have two unrelated questions. How has the COVID pandemic affected your country?
We have been very much affected by COVID. COVID is a global crisis, and none of us may claim to have been spared by this. You know, we have really been affected. Let me share with you that statistically, as we speak today, Africa is vaccinated, less than 10% of all Africans are vaccinated. 1.2, 1.3 billion people, less than 10% is vaccinated. Today, we are talking about inequalities in terms of vaccination. We are talking about vaccines apartheid, if we may call it that way. But be that, now to the question, really, we have been affected like any other countries. I wouldn't want to say that we have been more affected than the other, but certainly we have been impacted by that because, again, it affected our economic growth. Before COVID, we were, I think, we were at the 7 or 8%. Now we are going back to 4 to 5%, you know, our rate. So you can imagine that the way we have been taken back, basically, really because of the COVID. So the effect is there, and we are trying to do our best to move out of that.
Follow up to that, how is the vaccination program, given that you have a limited supply going forward?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge because there was a time the issue was about availability of vaccine. It was not about even ability to buy the vaccine. The supply was extremely limited, extremely limited. Now, the United Nations set up a fund called COVAX, which was some sort of a basket where, you know, donation could be made in order to develop those vaccines and be able to supply them to those in need. So African countries, Tanzania included, we still benefit from the COVAX support, and we thank also the United States, which was among the first country to give us 1 million doses really when we embarked on the vaccination campaign. You know, so we thank you for that. But also, more important, we are trying to engage the World Trade Organization so that at least a certain technology transfer and intellectual property rights should somehow be waived in order the vaccines to be produced locally, because ability to produce is there, but there are other limitations that prevent us, means Africa, to really be able to produce that. And I hope that the ongoing discussion will contribute to the better understanding of it. But more importantly, I see more engaged discussion on how to give priority to Africa, because until all of us are safe, none of us is safe. And that's the trick question. That's a big trick.
Yeah, I agree. My second question is unrelated to everything else we've talked about today. One of the key things that has made the United States what it is today is education of the populace. And I know that Africa in general has some issues with education, having the population educated to some level of basic education. So I'm wondering how that situation is in your country.
Education is among the top priorities of my government. When we became independent in 1961, the government identified 3 major enemies. Ignorance was one of them. Disease was the second of it. That means education sector became one among the priority. Health sector as well. Now we have tremendously increased our investment in education sector in terms of setting up necessary infrastructures, making sure that at least within every village, which we have about 1,200 plus villages in Tanzania, that every village have kids have access to that. The government now has free education policy. You don't have to pay school fees, which used to be one of the limiting factors to that. So with free education, really, we can see an enrollment increase. And so access is enhanced. But equally important, we are investing in reforming our curriculum so that the content of what we offer to our youth becomes more critical in the contemporary 21st century. It is still a challenge, education, but education is among the top priority sector within Tanzania, and in investing in making sure that access is guaranteed to all kids. And I'm emphasizing all kids because of the past, particularly in other African countries where, for example, girls are not given equal opportunity to boys when it comes to education. So those are the issues that we are really grappling with. And those are the issues that, again, we are open, we keep on learning, and we are thankful to developing partners that are hugely supporting us, including the USAID. It's very much also helping us in terms of promoting education.
Well, thank you. At this point, first of all, it's 11:34, so we've already gone a little bit over our time, and we still have 3 hands raised. But Ambassador, we know that you're very busy, and you're missing Zelensky's remarks to the UN, or maybe you already missed them, and you're going to have to catch them on the rerun. And we really appreciate you making that sacrifice to be with us.
In fact, now the representative of Russian Federation is speaking.
Oh, you don't want to hear him. No, you got to hear him. He's an important person to listen to. So, okay, so we'll all have to catch it on the rerun.
Yeah,
but is it okay to go on for 3 more questions? You tell us, because you have things.
Yeah. Let's have 3 more questions.
Okay, fine. So Larry Cunningham, please make your questions short at this point. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to make it short. Thank you, Ambassador, for taking time out of your day. I know you guys are very, very busy, and a lot of things are always on your mind. But again, I also have 2 points I want to have your perspective on that are kind of unrelated. So 1, do you, or in particular the United Nations, draw a distinction between things that happen during conflicts like accidental bombing versus deliberate? In the sense of, it looks like from Ukraine's standpoint, there's a deliberate decision from the Russian government to bomb hospitals and maternity wards and where kids are located, and very little, nothing to do with any kind of a military or strategic value. Can you does the United Nations have draw any distinctions on that versus accidental versus deliberate policy?
You know, any conflict is governed by the international law, and any conflict must be governed by international humanitarian law. And clearly, these international norms are there, which prevents civilians being a target or civilian infrastructures. Now, to what extent a civilian infrastructure becomes a military target, that is something that's extremely controversial, because civilians and their infrastructures, they are supposed to be spared of the conflict. Now, I think what's happening at the moment, like in any other places, after what is happening, there will be certain accountability to find out who did what against the understandable norm. And I see Russia being very supportive of that. They want some sort of independent investigation. I see also other countries coming to that. But again, you know, there are other things that are easier said than done. I would leave it to that point.
Yeah. Okay, so next, Alan Hamilton, again, please keep it short.
Yeah. Well, Ambassador, thank you again. My question is about the Chinese infrastructure debt game. The Chinese go into countries, many of them in Africa, put inflated cost estimates and bids on project and make terms and conditions that the countries or the host can't manage to pay for. I went to Jamaica. I reviewed a project down there and told the Jamaicans that their refinery project was overpriced by as much as 50%. And the Jamaicans said, "Oh, we know, Alan. We just wanted to know how much the premium was." So the question is, Ambassador, have you got any of these Chinese infrastructure projects in Tanzania?
Chinese companies, yes, they're in Tanzania, and they have been there also for many years. I just want to remind you that Tanzania was among few countries, or almost the first country, to receive Chinese support in terms of our railway between Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Zambia, Tazara. So they have been there for many years, many years, and they're still there. Now, whether the issue of Chinese infrastructure data game is a very tricky point, because on one hand, you have to give benefit of doubt to the countries that are signing these contracts, that these are independent and the sovereign states, able to negotiate and able to decide what terms they want, you know. So I think that's where the trick lies, really, that countries themselves, they are able to negotiate and get a better deal out of that. But, you know, sometimes I do ask myself the personal question, like, if you see amount of literatures and statements that have been issued against the Chinese involvement in Africa, but also involvement in other parts, it leaves a lot to be desired as to why these contracts keep on coming, keep on being signed every day basis. So I think there are things that are not known to some, but I just want to believe that countries signing this contract, they know better and they're under no pressure to sign, but it is really their sovereign decision to take them.
Thank you. So Ron Weinger, you get the last question.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I could probably ask you questions for the next 5.5 hours at least, but I'll make this one as short as I can. The United States in various media, the United States has been blamed for everything from installing and supporting Hitler as Chancellor of Germany, through genocide in Iraq, and spreading diseases throughout Africa and other parts of the world. How is this is damned if you do and damned if you don't type of relationship. So to the best of your ability, how is the United States actually perceived? Is it is the United States a monster out to control the world? Or is it something that, like any other country, makes mistakes, but is, trying hard? Do you see this? Or can you see this?
all I can say that United States is among the key partner to Tanzania. And we have been a partner since independence, really. And we work very, very closely with the United States. So we consider United States as one of the major development partner in Tanzania, and who has contributed a lot to our stability, and we continue working together. And same to also other projects that I see from the United States. Now, I don't know if it was President Reagan who once said that United States is like a light on a hill or shining city on the hill, you know, a beacon of hope where all people would look at for inspiration and support and so on and so on, because the United States is a country that is constructed on a certain ideals. Now, I don't think that there is anything perfect or pure in institutions. The institutions, sometimes they make a decision based on certain understanding and the best need of the time. And when those are analyzed at a later stage, people may render some critique as one point or another. And so the media, as you rightly said, which really has a lot in terms of what United States should have not done somewhere else outside. But generally speaking, I think the United States is among very, very few countries that we all look at in terms of working together. And it has demonstrated the ability to constructively contribute to the stability of our welfare and the global governance, in my view, despite those few elements that may have really not been the best. But overall, I think I always tell the people in the US that they should be proud of the United States, because if you have had opportunity to live in other countries and see what other countries are happening, and also have had opportunity to be here, sometimes you find every reason to be proud of this nation, but also working for better. There's no doubt about it, because there's nothing perfect. These governments are run by humans, so, and these are human beings. So we always have, there is a need to always check, remind, you know, but I think you have a better system that takes a lot of accountability and be able to direct effectively.
Thank you. That's comforting. And before I hand the mic back to Vic, let me just thank you for an outstanding presentation, a wonderful conversation here. And I just make the observation that we have a trips committee at Old Guard, which has been, you know, not active, but we're going to become active again. So I'm going to pitch the idea that we do a trip to Tanzania,
Sure.
and including a safari in the Ngorongoro Park. And I just love to go there. Anyway, so Victor, the mic is yours.
Well, Ambassador, it's good to see you again today, and I can't, on behalf of the Summit Old Guard, I can't thank you enough for your informed, intelligent presentation and opening yourself up to the questions from the organization. And we greatly appreciate you and what you're doing. And there are two ways that we can thank you for today's presentation. The first is this certificate of appreciation.
Oh. Thank you.
Which I look forward to seeing on the wall in the embassy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And you'll notice on the certificate, Kennedy, that there is an orchid on the face of the certificate.
Yeah.
The orchid is because Summit used to be the orchid capital of the world. So that's why you see that beautiful flower. And the second way we thank you is with something we call the Old Guard salute. So if everybody unmute.
Thank you. Bravo.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kennedy. I'll be in touch with you personally.
Absolutely. Wow. Then let me wish you play, and let me move into a car and run to the Security Council chamber, right?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. God bless.
Okay. And Victor, thank you. And Ambassador Gastorn, today we have been honored with your presence.
Thank you.
We
very
thank you so much.